Hi, everybody. Welcome to Medicine 3.0. I'm excited to be back here. My name is Catherine Isaac, and I'm a physician at Bionic Health and our medical director. And today we're bringing back Dr. Jennifer Goldwasser. She's a dermatologist in New York, and she's a fabulous colleague of mine, clinician, educator. She's a wealth of knowledge. And she was with us talking about prevention of skin cancer, and now we're going to be talking about aging and skin rejuvenation. So let's get started. Jenny, let's start off by talking about what happens to our skin as we age and what are some of those things that, worsen aging for our skin.
Oh my goodness, there are so many age-associated changes. But first, I want to say thank you for having me back. It's a pleasure to be here. So age-associated changes, lots and lots of things change as we age. The outward signs are you might see that your skin becomes mottled.
Hmm.
It's not uniform in color. It becomes somewhat lax, and it can also become wrinkled. So those are the obvious things. You might also see growths on your skin. I like to point out if you have the experience of being with a very young baby and you look at their skin, it's juicy and plump and uniform and it has no marks on it or maybe just a few. And that's really what skin looks like in youth and before sun exposure. You can also sort of compare the parts of your body that are not sun exposed to the parts of your body that are.
Mhm.
Even if something as simple as looking at the underside of your arm,
That's what I was just thinking about. Yeah.
yes, and then looking at the part of your arm that is sun exposed all the time. And you
Mhm.
see it's different. The texture is different. It's not rough where it's been protected. It's not discolored. It's not as wrinkly. So sun is really primarily what changes the appearance of our skin over time.
Right. That's a really good motivator. I love that because you can see that clear evidence on your body. So if
Yeah.
you're thinking, like I want to try to minimize any ongoing damage, that's a clear indication that it's useful to protect against the sun.
Absolutely. I'll point out one other thing because it's such a common phenomenon and a very graphic depiction of what happens to your skin after sun exposure.
Mm.
We've seen people who are elderly who have these red purple blotches on their sun exposed skin, like their forearms and their hands.
Hmm.
And that's happening because the connective tissue in their skin has deteriorated and it's no longer able to support their blood vessels to keep their blood vessels intact.
Wow.
So even minor trauma, knocking into your countertop, something you might not even recall, can leave essentially a big bruise.
Right.
So that's another kind of graphic example of how sun causes deterioration in your skin.
And what is the name for that again? Isn't it like solar?
It is called senile purpura. I sort
Oh,
of
yes,
hate the
yes.
name because many people don't understand when they hear the word senile, they think it's we're talking about dementia.
Right.
Senile is just really a word that means age associated.
Hmm. Hmm.
So senile purpura is age associated purpura, but it probably would be better to name it solar purpura,
Yeah.
sun induced purpura.
Hmm. Right. Interesting. So we have these things to look forward to. The skin becoming more lax, structural integrity is lost. We hear a lot about things like changes in collagen, and so this is going to be a very useful segue into thinking about what are the things that we can do prevention wise, and what are the things that we can do over the counter that are useful for us. Is there actually any value?
Oh, sure. Yeah. There are so many things you can do to enhance your skin health and appearance. I always like to start at what can you take away?
Hmm.
That's my approach. So I like to approach medical problems first by subtraction. We
Love
talked a little bit about this. And so we've touched upon the idea, you and I, that things like tobacco, smoking, vaping can be something that can be subtracted. Things like alcohol and recreational drugging can be subtracted. These things take a toll on our bodies and our skin.
it. Hmm.
Um, Things like sunning can be subtracted. And I'm a big proponent of a plant-based diet.
Hmm.
So avoiding foods that are ultra processed or animal based. I'm not saying you have to be 100% vegan, but I'm saying we should recognize that those foods are not particularly healthful.
Hmm.
So by subtracting them, you kind of have this um, double benefit in that you're getting rid of something negative and you're hopefully replacing it with something positive, something like vegetables or beans or mushrooms, something that's going to have phytonutrients and antioxidants,
Hmm.
fiber, and these things will actually improve your health. So subtraction first and then addition next. I think I think we as allopathic physicians have all been trained to think addition first.
Hmm.
And I think it's a flaw in the training.
Yeah. I love the way that you framed it so clearly. I always like to think of, my sort of approach being more of one of simplicity. So doing the simple things first and then adding on after that.
Yes,
And I love the way that you're describing it because I do have a lot of members who come and they're like very interested and curious about like what are the supplements that I can add? What are the things that I can do from that perspective? And I try to think of like how much bang you're going to get for your buck. And so with supplements, not that they can't provide value, but for the buck that you're using, you're going to get, a certain amount of benefit. Whereas, as you describe, if you're subtracting out those obvious toxins, alcohol, marijuana, excessive sun exposure,
tobacco.
you're going tobacco, thank you. You're going to get a lot more value than what you're getting from adding that extra B12 supplement or even the vitamin D. Not that vitamin D is not useful, and I'm sure it'll come up, but you'll just get much more value from.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I agree with you. It's much more cost effective.
Hmm.
To
Hmm.
remember that our bodies are designed not to absorb and utilize nutrients that come in a capsule.
Right.
They are designed to digest food and extract nutrients from food. And we have to work with nature because we're part of nature. If you try to fool the system, it's not terribly effective in my experience.
Hmm.
So, for sure, I think you have to first address the subtraction. I have the experience fairly frequently of patients coming to my office with literally a shopping bag full of product, just throwing the whole kitchen sink at the problem. What ends up happening is it's counterproductive because your skin can't take so much.
Right.
Its skin is designed to be a barrier. So topical products have limitations.
I love that.
Nutrients are supposed to reach your skin through your digestive tract, through your blood. They're supposed to be reaching your skin that way. So while there are topical products that are helpful, and we'll talk about those,
Hmm.
I think we really should recognize that this is an inside out problem.
Yes.
Yeah, your skin is just an organ and it's responding to what you take in, just like other organs in your body do.
Right.
So, as far as topical treatments over the counter, like you said, less is more, keep it simple. You want to start with some sort of gentle cleanser. I tend to prefer something like Dove Sensitive Skin Bar or Body Wash.
Hmm.
It does have a little bit of a lather and it leaves a little bit of a protective residue on your skin. Now that takes a little getting used to. Not everybody loves that. But there are other gentle cleansers. I tend to really favor the La Roche-Posay skincare line. I
I
think
use their cleanser.
yes, they have a lovely gentle hydrating cleanser.
Yeah, I enjoy their foaming cleanser. I feel like it's effective without being too harsh on my skin.
Correct. I think their products are very well formulated and generally don't contain too many irritants. You
Hmm.
have to be careful about over-the-counter products that smell really good or that have particles in them that are going to be abrasive.
Right,
You
like
know,
the
there's
exfoliation.
a lot of gimmicks, things that are, have intense dyes in them. You want to avoid products that are just full of chemicals that are potentially going to be irritating, especially as you age, because your skin does thin, your epidermis does become atrophic. And things
Hmm.
that didn't irritate you as a young person might irritate you when you're older.
Right. I think
Um,
that's good advice.
yeah, so a gentle cleanser. Most older people benefit from having some sort of moisturizer on their skin.
Hmm.
That's variable. If you are sort of the dark, swarthy Mediterranean type, you might not need a moisturizer
Hmm.
at an advanced age. But if you're a peaches and cream Celtic sort of complexion, you very well may.
Right.
Um,
I have a couple of things I want to mention just in those two topics. One, I think this is an opportune time to talk about a very common skin condition that we see in primary care, general medicine. I'm sure that you see it all the time. I think part of it is an educational deficit, and that is seborrheic dermatitis. Can you talk a little bit about what that is, what it looks like, and how to manage it?
I'll tell you what we know about it, but even though it's super common,
Hmm.
um, it's still a little mysterious. So we know that seborrheic dermatitis, it's what most people would call dandruff when it affects the scalp.
Hmm.
But it can affect other parts of the body too. It can affect not only the scalp, but the face, the armpits, the chest, the genitals,
Hmm. Ears.
ears. And it can cause redness and scaling. And when people see scale, they often assume that dryness is the problem.
Yes.
But in fact, seborrheic dermatitis can generally be much improved with vigorous washing.
Hmm.
There's a yeast that's at the root of this problem. It's a yeast called Pityrosporum,
Mm.
also Malassezia. And we don't really understand how this yeast does its mischief. It may be partially a genetic predisposition that people have, either to grow the yeast a little too well or to respond to the yeast in a way that's a little bit aberrant.
Mm.
So it's still not entirely clear. We know there's a yeast, we know there's inflammation, and we know that vigorous cleansing is generally helpful.
Yes.
We also know, like, yes, simple products like Head and Shoulders shampoo, the original classic clean that contains purified zinc helps. We don't know why zinc helps, but it helps.
Right.
So a little mysterious, but you're right. People sometimes will cut back on cleaning. They'll shampoo less frequently when they see the flaking,
Mm.
when actually it would be better if they shampooed vigorously more often.
Yes. Yes. And I see it so often, and it's exactly as you say that people see the flakes and they assume it's dry skin, so they stop cleansing, or they're just using water thinking that that's the best way to wash their face. And so yeah, you actually helped educate me on how to best manage that. And especially when it's more obvious, I would encourage the washing twice a day with the
Yeah,
shampoo once time, and then a facial cleanser.
that's my formula. That's my formula. You remembered it.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
works perfectly.
works so amazingly well. People are always shocked by it. I will say one other thing about seborrheic dermatitis because we're focusing on aging skin.
Hmm.
So seborrheic dermatitis is something that happens in two populations. Babies,
Right,
they
crazy.
kind of that, and then also at the other end of life, as you're aging, it's more common.
Interesting.
And
Mm.
particularly true if there is, um, believe it or not, a neurological disease. And this is kind of a little known thing, but it's people who have, say, Parkinson's disease or Parkinsonism, they will be much more prone to getting seborrheic dermatitis. And this is just a little tip for you as an internist.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's a clue. When you see a patient who has a tremor or who has a shuffling gait, and they also have seborrheic dermatitis, that's a big clue that
Yeah.
they may have Parkinson's. Sometimes it's a
Interesting.
really early sign of Parkinson's. You can also see it when people are on medicines that affect the central nervous system, the brain.
Mm.
Like people who are being treated for mental illness will sometimes develop seborrheic dermatitis.
Wow.
And it can also happen when people say, God forbid, have a CVA, a stroke,
Yeah.
and debilitated for a period of time from a central nervous system issue.
Wow.
Yeah. And even just from hospitalization and immobility where they don't have an opportunity to wash.
Yes.
So as we age, those things can also contribute to the incidence, the prevalence of seborrheic dermatitis.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Great.
And immunosuppression too.
What'd you say? Immunosuppression?
Immunosuppression, as we learned during the AIDS era,
Mm.
was a really common problem in AIDS patients.
Wow. I didn't
Yeah.
know that.
Yes. Yeah. You're a little too young for that.
Yeah, just missed that. Yeah, and so the next thing you had started to talk about was, I think, like moisturizers and, changes as we age and how we may need to have more moisturizer when it wasn't necessary earlier in life. And that is something just in buzz now, talking about menopause, definitely that there's a shift to the skin being drier. So that's something I think is important to talk about.
Yes. So it's true that when we're talking about women, how women age, there is a very dramatic difference between men and women in that women have this seismic shift in their metabolism that occurs when they go through menopause and perimenopause. So we do see, while men will get gradually drier as they age, women will get gradually drier. Plus, when they have this huge change in their hormonal milieu, they will have a very exaggerated
Yes.
and rapid drying out of lots of things in their body, including their skin.
Hmm.
So that is very much true. And there's a lot of controversy now. Um, People are debating whether estrogen is something we should be using more liberally. I'm a conservative person. People are using estrogen as a topical facial cream, as an anti-aging treatment.
Hmm.
I'm not on board with it yet. I don't know whether I ever will be. I just don't think we have enough evidence vis-a-vis safety and vis-a-vis efficacy
Hmm.
to really recommend it. I have a huge respect for hormones. They're very potent. They have unseen, poorly understood ramifications. So I just think we have to treat them very carefully.
Hmm.
But yes, moisture becomes a real problem after menopause. We talked about gentle cleansing, we talked about moisturizing. I will also point out the third really essential component for pretty much everyone is sun protection. But what I find with patients is we get into a rut early in life, maybe in our 20s or 30s with a skincare regimen. We may not even think of it as a skincare regimen.
Right.
But like I'll see people who are in their 70s and I say, first tell me exactly what you do every morning and every evening. Often people have a hard time even articulating what they do.
Hmm.
And I'll have to say, what do you want? Do you wash your face? What do you use to do that? Do you put on any products after you wash? And I'm always surprised when people say, oh yeah, I use an astringent. I use a sea breeze pad or something. 70 years old.
Cool.
You're using your acne regimen, right? We have to rethink this. I'm surprised how often this happens. People get in a groove and they stay with it for 50 years.
Yes.
And they're wondering why they're dry and irritated. Goes back to our subtraction. But ditto kind of with soaps. People will
Yes.
tell, I'll ask what soap they're using, and they tell me
Irish
some
Spring.
Irish Spring. And I really no. Tell me you're not using Irish Spring. You didn't notice that was really highly fragranced and drying you out. So it's always a little bit funny for me. I joke with my patients. There are two kinds of patients. There are the patients who have good skin instincts, and the patients who have terrible skin stinks.
Just kidding.
The people who, I mean, I can give you a million examples, but people who just like, that's what you thought was going to solve the problem? Really? So it's always a little funny in our office. We joke about that, but
You made me think of the first, I think it's like My Big Greek Wedding or whatever that movie is. Doesn't he like, he sprays
yeah,
like ammonia on his skin, the father?
great example of poor skin stinks. Yeah. Yes. So
Yeah,
you see, so few things work, and I think this is true with all of our organs. We have to admit, we have to recognize that our bodies change as we age, and you have to listen to your body.
right.
You have to pay attention to what your body is telling you.
Yes.
So I always joke with my husband because I've known him since I was 19 and he was 21,
Aw.
And I remember when he could just have an Italian sub, wash it down with a couple of beers, and just be fine. Now, I have to remind him, you're not 21 anymore, and that's not going to sit so well. That's not going to sit so well. So
Your
we have
skin is
to,
not going to be glowing tomorrow.
right, we have to really recognize. And when I was reading through what we were going to be talking about today, sleep is another good example of that. When you're 20 years old, if you get a bad night's sleep, you roll out of bed, you put yourself together, you look fine.
Right.
But not the case when you're 50, 60, 70.
No.
Shows. It shows. Even one bad night's sleep shows.
Hmm. Yeah, I was actually saying to one of our colleagues here yesterday that if I don't sleep, I feel like I'm in my 20s and I have a bad hangover, like just because I didn't sleep.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Just don't bounce back the way we used to. Yeah.
Hmm.
That's what I like to point out. We break, we don't bounce after a certain age.
That's funny. I wanted to mention or ask about moisturizers because they will advertise about how they contain different elements and it can be confusing. And I'm like a kindergartner when it comes to skincare. I have like my basics that I learned from you in terms of like,
You. Look at how gorgeous your skin is.
thank you.
Keep it simple. Hmm.
um, but like, so there are these products, they talk about ceramides, they talk about hyaluronic acid, they talk about these other like additives. What are the things that actually would be valuable to use, and what are the things that are just not doing anything for us?
Really good question. All right. So first, let's talk about moisturizers, the vehicles that they're available in.
Okay.
So there are oils, and there are bath additives, and there are lotions, and there are creams, and there are ointments, and there are emollient foams even now. For dermatologists, vehicle is really important. Vehicle is really important. This is sort of counterintuitive, but water is a drying compound. When you put water on your skin and it evaporates, it will make your skin a little drier. When you put something that's rich in oil on your skin, it will hold in the moisture and act as a moisturizer. And there are also ingredients in moisturizers that can actually draw water into your skin. We call these humectants. So there are emollients that contain a lot of oil, and then there are humectants that draw water into your skin. And hyaluronic acid is the best example of a humectant product.
Hmm.
That's why it's so popular right now, and it is pretty wonderful. But when you're choosing a vehicle, you should recognize that a lotion is primarily water. It is an emulsion of some oil in water, whereas a cream is an emulsion of some water in oil, primarily richer and more hydrophobic, more less water-based, more oil-based. So you want to use a rich, creamy product as an older person. So generally, those are available. The format that most people would choose there is a cream,
Mhm.
because if you choose an ointment, it's very moisturizing, but it can be greasy and tacky and stain your clothing and make it impossible to function in the world because you're just too slippery and greasy. So the first thing is to find a product that's a rich cream, and those generally don't come in pump tops.
Pump.
Those
Okay.
they generally come in a jar.
Hmm.
It's a little, yes, less user friendly for most people, but that's the first mistake people make. They buy a thin lotion.
Okay. That's very helpful. So even just looking on the shelf, avoid the pumps, go to the jar or like a tube with a thicker top that's going to be easier to dispense from.
as a rule. There are a few products out there that have the pump top and are rich enough.
Mhm.
And I end up recommending them often because it is so user friendly to use a pump.
Okay.
So, for instance, Vanny Cream Moisturizing Cream is a good choice, and it comes in a jar, but the jar has a pump top.
Okay.
And that's a brand that's free of fragrance and dyes and allergens. So that's a good brand for people with sensitive skin,
Great.
Vanny Cream. And then again, I love the La Roche-Posay Lipicar product.
Okay.
That's available in a pump, and that's a
Mhm.
nice product, and it's still available as a pump. And then CeraVe or Cetaphil in a jar. Those are fine choices. For really dry areas like the lower legs,
Yes.
especially if people are prone to rashes on their lower legs,
Hmm.
sometimes the case if their veins aren't working so well. There, I favor something super greasy and super simple, like Crisco shortening.
Oh, wow. Okay. So we're
So
talking
not
about really dry legs.
really dry legs. So something that is just basically um,
Yeah.
an oil.
I was
Crisco
going
is
to
a
ask about
simple oil.
coconut oil.
Coconut oil is an option. I find that coconut oil, I think Crisco is the better option. They're
Okay.
similar, but I think Crisco is the better option for a variety of reasons.
Hmm.
Um, and people often balk when I say Crisco. I keep it in my office to demo it because when we put it on their skin, they say, oh, this is nice. This is
No,
yeah, I always joke one day I'm going to put it in a fancy little bottle and
exactly.
slap my label on it and sell it for $1 million, and people will think it's a miracle product. But you can also use it on delicate areas like your lips and
Hmm.
it's edible. I mean, I'm not saying you should spoon it into your mouth, but it's not toxic.
Right.
You can use it on your eyelids, and you can even use it in sensitive areas like the perineum, the genitals, if you have some irritation there. So
Mhm.
it's kind of a wonderful, little secret in dermatology to use Crisco.
I imagine that that's also probably quite useful on the feet with calluses, and sort of helping with some of the softening cracked heels and things like that.
So cracked heels is it's kind of an entity unto itself. I think of that as a form of psoriasis.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And so people often don't realize psoriasis can take many forms,
Mm,
including hyperkeratosis of the heels, thickening of the skin.
yes.
When the skin becomes thick on your feet, it will often crack, fissure, especially in cold weather. And what I find is if you really drill down a little with people who suffer with that, they'll often attribute it to something they're doing. Like they'll say to me, "Oh, well, I walk barefoot. That's why I have that," or "I wear flip flops. That's why I have it." And I say, "No, no, no. This is a genetic predisposition. And if you ask your parents, I suspect one or the other had this or has this." And then they say, "Oh, yeah, my mother had this. Yeah,
Hmm.
my mother. Yeah." So for
Interesting.
those areas, sometimes you need something that has a little more muscle. So the active ingredients to look for would be either an acid like salicylic acid or urea.
I was going to say urea. Yeah.
Yes. And those are available over the counter. And they're much more effective. So sometimes what I'll have people do is after the shower, put on a strong urea product, something between 20 and 40% urea, and then grease up with something really greasy like Crisco or petroleum jelly, and then throw a sock on
Hmm.
and keep it on overnight. And that is a really good way to chemically exfoliate. That's really what you're doing. You're exfoliating big time and using chemicals to do it. But the problem is, once the fissures have formed, it's really hard to get them to heal. Plus, urea and acid will burn like the dickens.
Mm.
So really the best time to start taking care of your feet, at least up here in New York, I encourage people to start like October. Don't wait till it's so bad that the skin has cracked because
Right.
it's an easier thing to prevent than it's one of those ounce of prevention, pound of cure things.
Right. And just to clarify, so we're not talking about everybody that has dry heels or dry soles in it. We're talking about people who have like thickened skin, cracked skin. It can be painful. So we're not talking about the average Joe here.
Right. So your question is like, does everybody have psoriasis if they have thick skin on their heels? No, not everybody. But it definitely would prompt me to look for other signs of psoriasis.
Hmm.
Maybe thick skin on the knees or the elbows, maybe some scaling in the scalp,
Right.
maybe, yeah, maybe some red scaly spots on their extensor surfaces or rashes in their body folds. So, you know, exposing, I feel sort of lucky because in dermatology, the whole thing in dermatology is to examine skin. So we're getting people totally undressed, we're exposing them.
Hmm.
And when you're trying to make a diagnosis, at least this is what I always taught the residents, expose, expose, expose. Look, because sometimes the signs of disease are not neon signs, there you have to hunt for them.
Yeah, yeah.
You
That's
have to
brilliant.
have to do a directed physical exam. If this is in your differential diagnosis, then where can you find the clues?
Right. Wonderful. So we're talking about moisturizers. We talked about delivery vehicle, creams, lotions, and we talked about hyaluronic was the humectant. So that's a good thing to have in a product that you purchase.
Yes.
What about,
And they,
tell us a little bit about ceramides.
well, so things like ceramides, yes,
Hmm.
they can enhance a moisturizing product for sure. But what I was going to say is you really also want to think about what other functions you hope this product will perform for you. So, for instance, are you looking for a moisturizer for your face that you're going to use every morning? Because if that is the case, maybe you want to choose something that has a mineral block in it. And if you
Sunblock, you said?
block, yes. And if you also have some evidence of sun
Hmm.
damage on your face as an older person, maybe you would like to find a product that not only has a mineral block in it, but also has a little tint in it. So you might choose one product to use on your face in the morning and a very different product to use at night when really all you're hoping to do is moisturize, not to conceal and not to sun protect, but just to moisturize. You might choose something
Hmm.
greasier, heavier to use at night than you would use in the morning. And it may also vary a little bit depending on the season and what you're going to be doing.
So
So, yeah.
that's a great thing that you mentioned. Do you recommend moisturizing twice a day?
So, I'm a big believer in one size does not fit all. You have to know whether you need it or not. And how do you know? So here's where I think it can become a little problematic. We talked about, skin stinks. Some people seem to know, and they just seem to just know what their body needs. They pay attention and they know. But some people are looking for answers in all the wrong places. And I joke about this with my patients too, because they'll come in and they'll say, really? You think I should do that? Because my sister-in-law told me. And I say, oh, is she a dermatologist? And they say, oh, no, she's a court reporter. And I giggle. And then I say, what did your plumber think about it? They're looking in all the wrong places for answers. You're here in my office. You're here in my office. And I don't know everything, but presumably I know a little more than your plumber or the court reporter knows about skin. So come to the right place and recognize that, there are um, lots of estheticians out there who are recommending products. So patient goes for, say, a facial.
Yes.
And the petition says, oh, you need a 5-step morning routine and a 10-step evening routine. Hold it, right? We know that's not going to be the answer. And in fact, it can really backfire because the more products you use, again, your skin is atrophic. It's going to
Mhm.
be sensitive.
Yeah.
It's different than young skin. So the more products you use, the likelier you are to become irritated. Many anti-aging ingredients are irritating.
Mm.
You have to recognize that an esthetician is a business person. There are plenty of excellent estheticians out there, and I don't want to badmouth them as professionals, but a big part of their motivation might be to sell product.
Right.
So you do have to be careful. And even, I hate to say it, but even some of my dermatologic colleagues sell product.
Right.
And so you have to really ask yourself, why do I have all these products? Who
Right.
sold this to me? Was it someone behind a cosmetic counter who has, a job where they're working on commission? Or was it somebody who understands skin, who has the primary motivation of keeping my skin healthy? So I wish, that 300 million people could all visit a dermatologist in this country. I don't think it's really possible because the manpower shortage is real.
Right.
But if you do have an opportunity, at least once in your life, or once every 5 or 10 years, to see a dermatologist, somebody who's really trained and who has the time to really talk to you and examine you, and evaluate you thoroughly, you can really get, I think, much better advice from a physician. And many primary care physicians are good sources of information. I wish we could disseminate the information
Right.
to primary care doctors more readily so that they would feel
More comfortable.
comfortable making basic recommendations.
Agreed. Agreed. I have a couple of questions about like application of things on the face and how to apply it. But before we go there, let's talk a little bit about some of the common anti-aging tools that are
Ingredients.
available. Yeah.
Or are we talking now about over-the-counter ingredients, or are we talking about
Let's
uh,
start with over the counter and then talk about some of the common prescriptions.
okay. So over the counter, retinols are the most potent and most commonly used anti-aging ingredient. And retinols are a derivative of vitamin A. So just going to make a plug for diet right
Mhm.
here because vitamin A is something that we get from vegetables. I think even the general public would probably remember that carrots are a great source of vitamin A
Right.
vegetable. So, but initially retinoids were introduced because it was noted that vitamin A was therapeutic for acne. But vitamin A is pretty toxic in large doses. It can actually do you some damage. So people started playing with that molecule and created topical retinoids
Mm.
because they had a better safety profile than just vitamin A. And so initially retinoids were used for acne, and then it was noted serendipitously, like, wow, people are looking younger when they use this. Their skin looks less wrinkly when they use this. And so manufacturers started developing products for mature skin that contained retinol.
Hmm.
So retinol is the over-the-counter version of a retinoid, and it's in many, many products. But retinoids in general, they do two negative things as well. They are a little irritating and they are sun sensitizing.
Mm. That's important.
Yeah, and it's not the way most people think of sun sensitizing. It's not like when you put on your retinoid cream, if you then go out in the sun, you're going to get a burn. That's not what I'm talking about. What it does is it thins your epidermis a little so that you will burn more readily. So if you've been using your retinoid for a period of time and then you're out in the sun, you'll be more susceptible to sunburn and sun damage
Right.
than you would be if you hadn't. So you definitely have to counter that effect by always, if you're using a retinol or retinoid, using a sunblock in the morning, which we'd want you to do anyway when you're going to be outside. So that's retinol. It's in a zillion products,
Hmm.
and it usually says it right on the front of the product. But you can always read the ingredient list. And then probably the next most popular thing is vitamin C. And using topical vitamin C, and I will point out another vitamin that's abundant in fruits and vegetables, vitamin C used topically can also be helpful as an anti-aging product. It can stimulate collagen production. And when that happens, when those collagen fibers become more abundant and beef up, then your skin will look smoother.
Right.
It is an antioxidant. The problem with using topical vitamin C is a chemical that is easily broken down. It's sensitive to light, it's sensitive to heat, it breaks down with light or heat exposure. So it's difficult to formulate a product that has stable vitamin C. And the products that are really great are costly,
Hmm.
much cheaper to eat an orange every day, I would say. So, and probably a better way to deliver vitamin C to your skin. And then there's a whole host of other things for people who can't tolerate retinoids or can't tolerate vitamin C. You could try peptides. You could try um, just using a rich moisturizer that contains hyaluronic acid. You could use something that has niacinamide if inflammation is part of the picture for you.
Mm-hmm.
So there are many other ingredients, but it's really patient specific.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And as you're talking, I'm thinking like I have rosacea, and I actually use an over the counter topical azelaic acid that actually controls my rosacea pretty well. But as you're saying that, I'm thinking if you're going to be doing something like vitamin C, that could potentially be irritating, whereas niacinamide might be a better option. Would
Correct. So for someone who has rosacea who wants to use a moisturizer with an active ingredient, yeah, niacinamide would be a much better choice than vitamin C. Yeah. And that's where, yeah, people do run into trouble.
hmm This is
Um,
good. This is good to know. And would you ever suggest, or and again, I know it's probably patient specific, but maybe using a product like vitamin C twice a week, as opposed to on a daily basis? Would you still get benefit from using it intermittently as opposed to daily?
Yeah. So the gold standard is to use a retinoid daily.
Mhm.
That's the gold standard, but many people can't tolerate that. So we do sometimes do some sort of cyclic therapy, So, well, let's say day one you'll use a retinoid, and day two you'll use vitamin C, and day three you'll use niacinamide. You can do that. It does make the routine more complicated, of course, and more expensive, but it is sometimes done. Sometimes we just do a retinoid alternating with a rich moisturizer. And sometimes, like I said, there are seasonal differences. Like, so in the winter months in New York, many people find that a daily use of a tretinoin, a prescription retinoid, is just too much.
Mhm.
In the winter months, you might alternate. And in the summer months, you could use it every day.
And the topical tretinoin, the retinoid, that's once a day, or is that a twice a day application?
So, topical tretinoin is the prescription version of a retinoid.
Mm-hmm.
That is only to be used at night because it is inactivated by sunlight.
Uh-huh.
That's why we have people use it at night. And so it should be applied well after washing, at least 20 minutes after washing, and it should be applied sparingly. Usually the directions are to apply a pea-size amount to cover your whole face. And I usually demo it in my office because people really don't know how to apply creams. And the truth is, you have to understand why you're applying the cream in order to apply it correctly.
Yeah.
So, for instance, if you're applying sunblock, you want to slather that stuff on because you are trying to protect yourself. You are trying to recreate the conditions under which it was tested, which is liberal use.
Right.
So you can think about it this way. When I write my prescriptions or directions for patients, I will usually stipulate apply sparingly or apply liberally because different products need to be applied in different ways. So sunblock, liberally.
Mm-hmm.
Moisturizer, liberally. Tretinoin, sparingly. So a size of a pea on your finger and then distribute it sort of like this, and then you rub it in. And what you're really aiming for is a thin, invisible film. We call it a vanishing cream. You don't want to see globs of it on your face.
Right.
You don't want to use it on this delicate area, the upper eyelids. You don't want to, obviously, use it on your lips, a very delicate area. And you really have to be careful about doing this with it because the neck skin is really sensitive and easily irritated. And I very regularly see people coming into my office with irritation on their eyelids, on their face, on their neck, because they are either using product there or it is migrating there because they're not applying the product.
Ah, interesting.
Yes. So migration is definitely a problem. And one of the first things I ask when I see somebody with eyelid dermatitis, which is a common thing, particularly in women, is are you using any anti-aging products on your face? And often they will say, I do, but I don't put them on my. And I say, okay, but you're putting it on right before bed you're smearing it on liberally. It's going to be on your pillow. It's going to migrate to your eyelids,
Right.
and it's gonna irritate you. So it's helpful to sort of put a little layer of something greasy on your eyelids, Crisco or petroleum jelly at bedtime, so that you don't inadvertently trigger an eyelid dermatitis.
That's good to know. So, just to reiterate, avoid the topical tretinoins, upper eyelid, and any of the lips. What about kind of like in this area where people are concerned about crow's feet and things like
Yes, it's actually fine to use it here.
that? Okay.
It's fine to use it here, and it's fine to rub it into your crow's feet, and you should do that. And don't rush. Take your time. This is self-care. Make it a little mini facial massage.
Mm-hmm.
Rub it in. And actually, I learned that from a patient with psoriasis. He did so well. Whenever he came to me with a flare, I'd give him a prescription for an ointment, come to me in follow-up 4 weeks later, and he'd be like, perfect. And I'd say, Aldo, what's your secret? Like you're so amazingly improved. And he'd say, I take my time with it. My
Love it.
time. Rub it in. I really make sure to rub it in. I take my time. And it really got me thinking. We're all in such a hurry.
Yes.
It's hard to even find the time to apply it, let alone really sort of lean into it and give it a really good massage in. But that's a great thing to do for yourself.
Yeah, that's I think that's really good advice. And so at we're doing a nighttime cleansing, and then 20 minutes later applying the topical tretinoin, letting that really soak in before we go to lay down so that it's not rubbing all over the place. Can put a little bit of a topical skin protectant on the eyelids, like
Okay.
petroleum jelly.
Yes.
And what about after the topical tretinoin at night? Do we do a moisturizer for people who are dry? Would you put that on top of the tretinoin, or is that a no?
I generally prefer not to, but
Mhm.
that varies from dermatologist to dermatologist. I like to be sort of purist about it at night.
Okay.
I will point out that 20-minute waiting period, that's at least 20 minutes.
Okay.
Um, I tell people to do this. When you come home from your day, from your work or your day, go wash your face and then have your dinner, do whatever it is you do. You can exercise, you can read, you can watch TV, whatever you do, and then put your tretinoin on.
Mm,
It could be 2 hours after you've washed. It could be 3 hours after you've
got
washed.
it. Got it.
Ideally, it's not immediately before bed, but if you're careful about how you apply it, and if you protect your lips and eyelids and don't rub it down your neck, then you'll probably be okay even to do it at bedtime.
Got it. Good to know. All right. Excellent. When is it a good idea to switch from an over the counter tretinoin product to a prescription strength tretinoin?
Really good question. So the first few weeks of use of a retinoid is kind of a critical time, because those first few weeks are the time that irritation is likeliest to develop. So usually when we're newly starting somebody on tretinoin, either depends again, it depends on their coloring, how well I think they'll be able to tolerate it. But if they're very fair and a little bit sensitive, then I might say, let's use an over-the-counter retinol for 6 months and see how you do. Get a sense.
Mhm.
And then if you're doing well with it, we'll switch you to a prescription. That's usually my approach. But if I'm starting someone fresh on tretinoin and I don't feel like they need necessarily to condition their skin for 6 months with a retinol, I'll give them the prescription and say, for the first 2, 3 weeks, just use it every other day and see how you do with that approach. And of course, my practice is a little unique because my patients can reach me very readily by text.
Mhm.
So they can just shoot me a text message to say, like, yikes, my face is flaky and red. And then I'm going to tell them how to calm that down.
Mhm.
And then we're going to try a different tack. But here in New York, when people see me in January and want to start a tretinoin regimen, I will sometimes say, let's wait till April. Like, let's not do this in the dead of winter when it's 12 degrees and gusty,
Right.
the ambient conditions have a very big impact.
Got it.
And I also tell people who skiers run into trouble, so they could be sailing along using their tretinoin on a regular basis, and then they go on a ski trip to Utah where they're, in the
To
mountains.
try.
The UV index is high, the air is dry, they're out all day, you do the math, you know what's going to happen. They're going to end up irritated. So you have to remember, skin is more fragile, more easily irritated. Also, people who wax their mustache will find, or their eyebrows for that matter, will find that when they're using a topical retinoid, wax can rip your skin off.
Oof.
Yeah, so it makes your skin fragile. It makes your skin sensitive. It requires a little finesse. It requires tweaking. I like to use the word titration.
Yes.
People know what I'm talking about with that.
So, Jenny, actually, this is very helpful. So, we've heard a bit about some of the precautions to be aware of with topical tretinoins, like it's thinning the skin, you become more sun sensitive, you got to be careful if you're doing any kind of procedures like hair removal. What
Right.
is the benefit of the product?
Yes. So, and I had a secretary early on in my career who used to say, it makes you look 5 minutes younger. And everybody would say, okay, sign me up. It's it does make your skin look smoother, more uniform. It effaces the fine lines. And the longer you use it, the more pronounced those changes are. So I do have patients who have used it for decades.
Hmm.
And now they're pushing 90 and their skin looks really great. So, if you really stick with it, I do think it does make a difference. But what it will not do is it will not address the deep lines here that
Hmm.
people develop as they age. It will not improve skin laxity, so jowls that form. It will not really efface the wrinkles that form from muscular contraction, like the 11 lines between the brows,
Hmm. Hmm.
two vertical lines that look like the number 11, and the horizontal lines that form on your forehead from raising your eyebrows. And when you're talking about wrinkles like that, you really have to think about other modalities of treatment,
Hmm.
like Botox for the forehead and the 11 lines, or fillers for the deep lines that form here, or plastic surgery for the laxity, um, or maybe an intense laser procedure for the laxity. So you have to know what you're signing up for, what it's going to do for you, what the caveats are. It's not a slam dunk. And again, not a one size fits all answer.
Right, right. So this is interesting. So it sounds to me like tretinoin is a good kind of first approach, daily use anti-aging agent, and it's really doing more of the finer lines, if anything. What about skin discoloration and melasma that develops?
Hmm. So melasma is a really complex problem.
Hmm.
And it's got hormonal underpinnings. It has sun exposure as a root cause. It is different in different skin types. Um, and it can be amenable to lots of different kinds of therapy, but also can be incredibly stubborn.
Hmm.
Um, Topical retinoids are sometimes used alongside a bleaching agent for melasma. And in someone who's a light-skinned Caucasian, that might be adequate. In somebody who we talked a little last time about different skin types, the Fitzpatrick scale, type 1 being the fairest of fair, and type 6 being the blackest African.
Hmm.
And most of us fall somewhere in between. So the lighter you are on that scale, the more likely you will respond to simple topical measures. But I do like to point out, because this is another example of an ounce of prevention, pound of cure,
Yes.
sun protection, sun protection, sun protection. And it's also one of those things that if you're taking a hormone, if you're on estrogen or on a birth control pill, of course, if you're pregnant and your estrogen levels are high for that reason, all of these things will also predispose.
Mm,
So it's sometimes called the mask of pregnancy, but it certainly can happen in people who are not pregnant. And it can happen in men as well as women, but though it is much more common in women.
great.
So it's complex.
Got it.
Um, but sometimes tretinoin has a place.
Okay. Well, so you started to pivot a little bit to talking about fillers and Botox. So I'd love to talk and learn more about each of those things and, when you might want to use it. Certainly, what are the risks and can you correct any problems associated, et cetera. I'll let you share on that.
So probably the simplest and most popular procedure is Botox, and now it's even young people are asking for it. And it's a pretty genius idea. Taking the botulinum toxin, the toxin that causes food poisoning, and the way it affects our bodies is it paralyzes our muscles. And we can use that property in a very controlled way to paralyze muscles selectively. So pretty genius idea, in my view, to
Hmm.
take this toxin and just paralyze the muscles that make us furrow our brow. And then our brow will look smooth because we won't be able to furrow it. So when you see someone who's had Botox, and you see them all around you, because they're on the news, there's a lot of newscasters who get them, and lots of people on the screen do use it, on the big screen or the little screen. But a lot of actors and actresses don't like to use it because your ability to make certain facial expressions will be altered.
Mm,
And so that is a negative thing about Botox.
yeah,
You furrow your brow when somebody's telling you something harrowing happened to them.
right.
Uh, you can't do that. It's potentially going to impact that interpersonal encounter. Uh, but other than that, it's actually quite safe. When it's in the hands of somebody who knows what they're doing, it's quite safe. And because it's a temporary effect, even if you were to have a side effect that's considered the most common side effect, which is lid lag, the inability to open your eyes as
Mm,
widely as you used to,
hmm.
uh, it will be a temporary phenomenon. It only lasts for 3 to 4 months.
Okay.
So not too much can go dreadfully wrong with Botox. So I think of it as a pretty safe intervention.
Okay.
It's expensive and it has to be maintained, every 3 to 4 months. So, with all of these cosmetic interventions, the expense is really the limiting factor for most people.
Hmm.
And then for plumping up these lines, another really common complaint, that would do better with filler. We don't want to paralyze the muscles around the mouth for obvious reasons. We need those muscles to talk, to
Right.
eat. So we can't really, I mean, people do use Botox a little bit around the mouth, but it's not really so commonly used that way. So fillers can be used to plump up these lines, and it will soften the lines. There are many different kinds of fillers that can be used, but most commonly it's hyaluronic acid.
Hmm.
You might hear the words Restylane or Juvederm. Those are brand names that are commonly used, just like Botox is commonly used for the neurotoxin that paralyzes muscles. These are brand names.
Hmm.
There are other brands. Um, and so, yes, you can soften the lines with filler, and depending which filler you use, it will last either a relatively short period of time or a moderately long period of time, or potentially even permanently. And then there are lasers and energy-based devices and lights that can be used on the skin. And there's a huge variety of those now. And they can do a lot of positive things to improve the appearance of skin. You can get rid of brown marks on the skin. You can get rid of dilated veins on the skin or redness from rosacea.
Mm,
Those sorts of lasers or lights are relatively safe for people with light skin in the hands of somebody who knows what they're doing with it. And those can be relatively inexpensive procedures and can produce a pretty long lasting improvement. But I would never promise anybody that they'll never need to do it again.
hmm.
I no longer do these procedures, but I have an excellent laser surgeon in my county to whom we refer pretty regularly.
Right.
Um, And there are other energy-based devices that actually don't damage the superficial layer of your skin, but so much, but actually the energy penetrates to your dermis and can help your dermis sort of thicken and strengthen and tighten, so that the net is that your skin looks tighter and smoother. And those effects can be really pretty dramatic, considering those are relatively non-invasive or minimally invasive procedures. So there have been many strides made in this arena. And then, of course, sort of last resort is surgery. And for laxity, sometimes it does come to that. That's still the gold standard to lift the face, to lift the brow, to lift the neck, or to lift the eyelids, either above or below.
Mm-hmm.
So surgery. But of course, that's expensive and carries some risk, but can produce really dramatic rejuvenation.
Interesting.
Wonderful. Wonderful to get the eyelids done if you have those very, very droopy eyelids. It's very rejuvenating. It's relatively inexpensive compared to a facelift. And I find that to be a very forgiving procedure. Most people really are delighted with their results.
Yes. Yeah, I've had a number of patients who had that partially because it was obstructing vision
Oh, yeah.
and found it really, really valuable.
Well, if it's obstructing vision, then your insurance is supposed to even cover it. So,
Which is good.
yeah, which is wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
Interesting. So, is there any of the newer things that are available, newer procedures that you're particularly excited about? Like, wow, I really surprised at the effectiveness. It sounds like one of them is this light therapy that penetrates a bit deeper.
Yes. So actually, the procedure that I think is really interesting is something called radio frequency microneedling.
Mm-hmm.
So this device penetrates your skin with a tiny needle. And then while that needle is buried in your skin, a radio frequency energy is released that stimulates the collagen to tighten up. I think that's really very genius. I mean, I'm really impressed the way people have used laser energy and light energy over the course of my 32 years in dermatology. It's amazing how it has been refined and improved, and it's really wonderful. When I started, people who had an irregular texture to their skin, say from acne scars,
Yes.
we used to use dermabrasion, and dermabrasion is like really just taking essentially a drill with a diamond phrase on it
Oh,
and sanding down the surface of your skin. It was a very bloody procedure,
my
and
gosh.
it was a terrible recovery, and the risk of infection were quite high. So it was really a kind of a brutal and primitive approach. It worked, but now things are so refined and so clever. So there are lots of lasers that emit light now, or emit energy in a fractionated way, almost like a pixelated way.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of the light just, or the energy just ablating the entire surface, it goes into your skin as columns of energy. So it doesn't create these large areas that are denuded and susceptible to scar and infection. Instead, it's these penetrating injuries without denuding the surface so much. And while it may require multiple treatments, it's really much safer and much more elegant, a much more elegant and sophisticated way to rejuvenate the skin.
Very
And the
interesting.
other interesting concept, I think, is this idea of platelet-rich plasma,
Mm-hmm.
RP. Sometimes this is called a vampire facial when it's used to treat facial aging. But essentially, you draw blood from the patient, and then you spin the blood down, and you draw up the fraction of the blood that doesn't have the red blood cells in it, but it has the plasma, the platelet-rich plasma portion of the blood. This fraction of blood contains growth factors that can stimulate collagen production. So you can then introduce the patient's own plasma into their skin to try to get that machinery moving a little bit in the right direction.
Right.
And it's It's not FDA approved for that use, but it is widely used in that way. It was FDA approved for joint issues. So you can take somebody's plasma and inject it into their joint to rejuvenate a joint.
Yes. Yes.
And
My
it's,
mother-in-law just had that actually.
she did, yeah. And you can also use it to stimulate hair growth on the head, on the scalp.
Ah, interesting.
So these are all interesting. These are all interesting and innovative approaches.
We have all these people wearing these red light masks.
Yeah,
Is it useful? Is it not useful?
it may be useful.
It may be useful.
May be useful. There are a couple of devices that have gained FDA approval. Um, the evidence, in my view, is still a little sparse.
Hmm.
Um, and in fact, I reached out to one of these companies because when I read about the product, I went out to the website to learn about this product because it's a device that's FDA cleared. I noticed that their bibliography was a little meager at the end. These scientific articles supporting the use of this product, a little
Right.
studies, kind of old. So I sent an email to the company itself and said, "Do you have any other articles you can point me to? Because I'm looking at PubMed and I don't see anything that's like jumping out at me as really an impressive study."
Right.
And the answer I got, I thought was kind of revealing. They said, "No, we don't really have anything else to point you to." And I thought, yeah, this is just not robust. This is just not robust evidence for safety and efficacy.
Yeah.
And I always worry, I'm so leery about light and energy because historically physicians have used light and energy and have really done some damage with it. I mean,
Oh,
you know,
used to treat acne, right, with radiation.
yes, and even ringworm. You
Yeah.
know, people were treating ringworm in children with X-ray. I mean, we have to really reflect on our history. It's we don't want history to repeat itself here. So we used ultraviolet lights, maybe a little bit haphazardly, and caused some skin cancers. I'm sure that way. We have used X-rays, not very judiciously. So I don't want this to fall into that bucket.
Right.
I think we have to wait a little longer, wait till we have more evidence for safety and efficacy.
Yes. Yes.
And unfortunately, with lights, things don't happen immediately. You can radiate somebody and they don't necessarily get a cancer the next day, but 10 years down the line, or even 20 years down the line, they may be more
It becomes
susceptible.
problematic. Right.
So, yeah, we have to remember we're treating something. Listen, wrinkles wrinkles are a relatively trivial problem. We always have to weigh risk versus benefit.
Absolutely.
There's so many ways to treat wrinkles. So let's not jump on the bandwagon just yet with estrogen cream or with red light therapy. Maybe those will prove to be useful in our
Mhm.
armamentarium, but I don't think they're go-to products or go-to approaches right now, in my opinion.
Well, thank you. I love to hear that too, because, I think especially in the area of women's health and menopause, there has been like a dearth of information for the public and for physicians. And so now that people are interested in talking about it, we don't want to swing too far in the other direction and just like be overloading people with medications when it's not necessarily indicated or going to provide value. So it's always important to have a discussion. These are the potential benefits. These are the potential risks. Let's think about it. Let's talk about it before we make a decision.
Absolutely. We always have to investigate the trade-offs. There's always a trade-off. Yeah.
Yes, even if it's just to the pocketbook, right?
Correct.
But
Correct.
it's still worth having that discussion. So, but thank you, Jenny. This has been phenomenal. I love talking to you. Again, I could sit here for another 3 hours, have a conversation with you.
I wish you still lived closer so that we could just have.
I know. Me too. Me too. Well,
Thank you so much for having me again.
yeah, thank you for being here. This was really, really informative, and I'm sure our members are going to get a lot out of this. So thank you again, and I hope you have a beautiful week. It's great to see you.
You too. Take it easy.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Medicine 3.0. We make this podcast so that you know where to turn for good information on keeping you and your loved ones healthy. feel free to check us out at bionichealth.com, where we can help you live a longer, happier life.